It's almost hard to believe, but just 2 decades ago, Japan was the second largest economy in the world, and 10 years before that, well, economists were seriously debating, not if Japan would overtake the US economy, but when. The situation was so wild in the late 1980s and early 1990s that it was famously said, the land under the Imperial Palace in central Tokyo was worth more than all the real estate in the entire state of California, a state not exactly known for its affordability. It was mind-boggling. But we all know how that story ended. After the massive real estate and stock market bubble burst in the early 1990s, Japan's output largely stagnated. It was as if time simply stopped for them. Since then, they've been decisively overtaken by China, and the gap with the US has widened considerably. So why did a giant that rose so fast get stuck in a decades-long rut? Is Japan a warning sign for us all? Looking back, the failure to continuously grow isn't entirely surprising. The country had multiple underlying structural issues, and its so-called global advantage simply eroded over time. The famous economist Simon Kuznets once made a witty yet pointed observation, stating, "There are 4 types of economies in the world: underdeveloped economies, developed economies, Argentina, and Japan." Argentina was the economy that had every chance to succeed, but still failed. Japan was the opposite, an economy that had every reason to fail, yet somehow refused to completely collapse, remaining perpetually stuck in a middle gear. But here's where the story gets exciting. After more than 30 years of economic stagnation, Japan is finally starting to show signs of a slight recovery. For the first time in a very long time, it feels like the wind might be at their backs. And this isn't just relevant to Japan. It's crucial for every developed economy. Why? Because Japan was, in many ways, an economy ahead of its time. If they hit the wall of stagnation first, it suggests that the issues they faced might not be unique, but rather a blueprint for what all sufficiently advanced economies can expect down the road. In a finite world, while it's comforting to think that the historic trend of limitless growth will continue forever, Japan offers a worrying warning that the boom we've all experienced over the last 2 centuries might be the exception rather than the rule. So, what does Japan's experience teach us? And is this glimmer of recovery actually real? Stuck in the year 2000. From the 1970s through the 1990s, Japan was literally living in the future. They were producing the world's most cutting-edge devices, rapidly building world-class infrastructure, adopting computers faster than the West, and setting records for per-worker productivity. But here is the problem. Japan is still living in that era. A country that was once 20 to 30 years ahead of its time is now 20 to 30 years behind. This is most evident in its key sectors, particularly technology. Japan used to be the definitive example of high-tech dominance, but now it struggles to embrace new technologies. Its companies lag significantly behind their US rivals. Consider this staggering fact. The combined market value of just Apple and Microsoft is higher than the total value of all publicly traded companies in Japan. With the exception of Sony, few of those formerly dominant companies have the global impact they once commanded. Take mobile phones as a prime example. Japan once produced a huge portion of the world's mobiles. Owning a Japanese phone was seen as a major advantage because they were typically more advanced and higher quality. Now that lucrative market is dominated by companies from the US, South Korea, and China. This loss of technological leadership isn't just about missing out on phone sales. It restricts productivity across the entire economy. Technology is what makes existing workers more productive. One worker operating an excavator can do the work of 100 workers with shovels. If productivity stalls, the economy stalls. Japan's structural roadblocks. There are only 3 ways an economy can increase its total output, or GDP. Work longer hours, making existing employees work more hours, increase labor force. Participation, getting more people into the workforce. Increase worker productivity, increasing the amount of value each worker creates per hour. Japan is deeply constrained on the first 2 options. 1. The overwork culture. The Japanese are already famous for working some of the longest hours globally. In fact, their culture is so intense that they have a term, karoshi, meaning death from overwork. While working long hours might impress a boss, it's not an effective macro-level strategy. It's impossible to grow the Japanese economy by asking people who already work more than almost anyone else in the world to work even harder. You quickly hit a point of diminishing returns where the societal cost is huge and the hour-by-hour value creation plummets. 2. Maxed out participation. Encouraging more people, historically women, to enter the paid workforce was a major tactic. While former Prime Minister Abe's womenomics policies had some effect, Japan's labor force participation rate is already near an all-time high. They've essentially maximized this strategy, meaning there is little room left for growth here. 3. The population problem, fertility and immigration. This is the toughest challenge. To grow the population, you need more births or more immigration. The fertility crisis. Japan has one of the world's lowest birth rates, partly due to the intense work culture. They have passed a critical demographic tipping point where a large enough segment of the population is too old to have children, putting more strain on younger generations to support the elderly, leaving them less time and resources to raise families themselves. Immigration resistance. Japan has been incredibly resistant to attracting skilled immigration. Why? The language barrier. Japanese is not a widely spoken second language, making it difficult for people seeking better opportunities to choose it over an English-speaking country. The culture barrier. The country has a very closed, homogeneous culture that makes integration difficult, which isn't exactly welcoming to foreigners. The lifestyle trap. The excessive work culture and the fact that average wages have been stagnant for 30 years, now significantly lower than in the US, Canada, and Western Europe, make it unattractive. Why would a skilled immigrant move there to work 80 hours a week for less pay, in a country where wealth accumulation is tough? If Japan could attract skilled immigrants at the same rate and quality as the US, it's highly likely they could solve their economic stagnation within a decade, but their resistance to this strategy means they are left with the final and most crucial option: increasing worker productivity. The housing paradox. Despite all these deep economic issues, Japan often earns praise for its approach to the housing market. In a massive metropolitan area like Tokyo, housing is surprisingly affordable compared to cities like Sydney, London, or Paris. The key to this success lies in flexible zoning laws and minimal restrictions. Housing can be built right next to offices and factories, and there are few limits on how high a building can be. This means there is a vast supply of cheap housing across the massive city. This abundant supply acts as a cheaper, comparable good, which in turn drives down the price of more premium options. Another factor is the expectation of future value. The massive real estate bubble burst when people realized prices wouldn't rise forever. Furthermore, Japan has incredibly high inheritance taxes, up to 55% on total estate value over about $500,000. This means that a large, expensive family home is no longer viewed as a prized, intergenerational asset, but rather a burden, or at best a disposable luxury item like a fancy car. But here is the catch and the paradox. One of the biggest reasons housing is cheap is because wages have been mostly stagnant for 30 years. Access to high-paying jobs is a key complementary factor to housing cost. If the workers in a region aren't earning much, demand for housing remains low, keeping prices down. For a talented immigrant, this creates a major disincentive. Affordable housing often means smaller homes, fewer amenities, and crucially, being paid less while being expected to work far more. They could move to a city in the West, earn more, live in a larger house, and build wealth for future generations. Or they can move to Japan, work 80 hours a week, live in a small home, and know that much of what they work for won't be passed down due to high taxes. The real culprit: institutional inertia. So, why did they lose their technological edge? Japanese companies are widely described by economists as being incredibly conservative regarding any new processes. Their rapid growth after World War II was the exception, because the war represented such a massive shock that they were essentially starting from scratch, and resistance from established norms hadn't had time to permeate the new industries. Now, leadership, often quite old, believes the best way to do things is the way they've been doing them since their peak in the late 1980s. It's institutional inertia in its purest form. This inertia was reinforced by low inflation. It became incredibly difficult for companies to raise the prices of their domestic products. This created a vicious cycle. Companies couldn't raise prices, so they couldn't generate sufficient profit to invest in new technology or increase wages. Without wage increases, domestic demand remained weak, maintaining the low inflationary pressure. Companies were forced to squeeze costs and overwork employees rather than innovate and profit from better products. A glimmer of hope. In recent years, several indicators have started turning in Japan's favor. The return of inflation, global pressures, largely driven by the COVID stimulus measures worldwide, finally forced inflation into the Japanese economy. The government welcomed this, as it's precisely what they had been trying to achieve for years. Companies now have the opportunity to raise prices to more sensible levels, allowing them to finally profit from producing better goods instead of just cutting costs and overworking staff. Geopolitical shifts. The main issue was that China was doing most of the manufacturing Japan used to do. But with the outsourcing becoming complicated, and with the relative decline in the value of the Japanese currency and wages, Japan is once again becoming a highly competitive manufacturing alternative, especially given its reputation for high-quality, reliable products. Investment magnetism. Japan's stability and low-risk economy are increasingly attractive to global investors, especially as risks increase elsewhere. These developments suggest a potential break in Japan's long-standing stagnation. Conclusion and the global lesson. As Paul Krugman once said, productivity isn't everything in the short run, but it is almost everything in the long run. Despite its stagnation, Japan has managed to maintain strong living standards, and in some areas, it arguably does things better than the West. But if its productivity permanently stalls, the rest of the world will simply grow around it. It will struggle to remain competitive, and its own people will start looking abroad for better opportunities. Japan may be stuck in the life of the 2000s, but it's sending a critical warning to all of us. Their stagnation is not a unique pathology. It's the likely fate of all developed economies that fail to adapt their technology, fix their population issues, and continually boost productivity. The myth of limitless growth may not hold true forever for mature economies. Can they recover? Perhaps. But the real question is, what will the rest of us do to ensure we don't live out Japan's last 30 years in the next 10 or 20? Japan's story offers invaluable lessons on how we can manage a future that might not be dependent on perpetual economic growth. What are your thoughts? Can Japan truly break free from this decades-long cycle? Let's discuss it in the comments below.